welcome to video number 8 of the Different Angle 3D video tutorial series for Blender 2.9. This will be the last of the getting started videos, and I'm going to talk through the basics of the tool set that's offered up on the left hand side of the 3D window to use in edit mode when you're creating your own models. It will simply be an overview of what each of the tools do with regards to adapting the models as you're building them. It's not going to build any specific model as such, just to demonstrate what each of the tools do. So I'll get started and get straight open with the default scene. So we're back with the default cube. I'm just going to zoom in on the cube. It's the middle scroll wheel of the mouse to zoom in and out, and I'll tab into edit mode. Oops, just bring it into focus. Tab into edit mode, and you can see the vertices, edges and faces that we talked about in the previous video. I'll need a few more vertices to demonstrate the different tools. So you can right click the mouse key and you have a set menu with a number of options, the first one being Subdivide. So if we subdivide the cube, what it does is split every edge that's on the cube and adds a central vertex and joins new edges between opposing cut edges, and adds new vertices as well where any of the new edges cross. So it's effectively split the cube into grids on the side rather than just a single face. And you've got the option in the Subdivide panel of adding more cuts for the subdivision, as many as you want. I'm going to work with 3 for the moment on that. Now, it's not just vertices that you use when you're subdividing. You can subdivide just a single edge by right clicking, click Subdivide with just one edge selected, and it will add a new vertex in the middle. That's now created a n-gon either side, because the faces either side have 5 vertices now rather than the 4. And you can also select a face and subdivide that. This can be done in either edge select, face select, or vertex select mode. And we'll subdivide the face, and you've now got a face that's been subdivided into 4 new faces. And again, surrounding that face, the faces become n-gons because you've got extra vertices on each of the edges that are connected to the surrounding 4 perpendicular faces. So that's basically Subdivide, but it does give you an option to put more detail into an area of a mesh to use the tools such as Extrude and various other tools. Very useful for adding detail into some areas but keeping other flat areas with a limited number of vertices. Selecting vertices, they're very similar to selecting objects, the options that you've got. You're already in box select mode when you go into Blender, and that allows you to drag a selection box over a number of vertices, and the selected vertices within the box become highlighted. If you notice on that selection there isn't an active vertex, and sometimes when you're snapping and doing other objects you need an active vertex to know exactly where to place what you're snapping onto it. So in that situation you'd shift and deselect and reselect a vertex to give you an active vertex or a snap point. So you've got options of box select. I'm just going to deselect all by pressing Alt A to deselect every vertex. You can select every vertex by pressing A and they all become selected. Alt A deselects them. You can individually select by clicking the left mouse button on a vertex, and it will deselect anything else that's selected when you left mouse button click, unless you press Shift and left mouse button click, in which case you just add to selection, and again Alt A to deselect everything. So we've got box select activated automatically. You can also do a circle select, and in the selection tools, if you just click and hold the left mouse button, it gives you a number of options. So circle select gives you a selection circle that you can drag with the left mouse button clicked over vertices, and anything that the circle passes over becomes selected. And even while you're dragging, you can scroll the mouse wheel with another finger as you're dragging, and the selection circle can either increase or decrease to select using circle select. The other option, and Alt A, you can go do box select by just using the hotkey B, and it gives you both the circle and box select in this situation, but you drag a box over exactly the same way as using the box select tool in the menu bar. Alt A to deselect them. And the other option is the lasso select, and this one you can drag a lasso around vertices and gives you an option to select irregular shapes rather than select it. You could do the same with circular select, but select irregular shapes with the lasso select. The final one that's in the menu is the tweak. That allows you, if you're doing organic shapes and you want to just finally move a few vertices, rather than having to click them and then select move, or you select a vertex and then press G for grab to move as you do in object mode, or use the move tools. What it does is give you a quick option to select a vertex, and as you move the mouse you can reshape the primitive or your model that you're working on into something totally different just by tweaking each of the vertices individually. So those are the select options that you've got within the select panel. It automatically starts with the box select, which is probably one of the most useful. So we can create vertices by subdividing as one of the methods, but quite often we have to also get rid of vertices, which is the delete option. And just zoom in onto the top here. If we just select the centre top vertex of the cube that we've subdivided, we can press the X key for delete, or you can use the delete key on the keyboard, but it means moving your left hand much further across the keyboard. It gives you a number of delete options because we're no longer just deleting the whole object as we do in object mode. So we get the vertices, edges and faces, and we also get the option to dissolve and some other options where you can only delete limited parts of a vertex, edge or face. And we'll start off with vertices. We've got the centre vertex selected, so X to delete and click vertices, and this deletes the vertex and it takes out all of the surrounding edges that are connected to that vertex, and because the vertex and edges are gone, it's also taken out the surrounding four faces. So every time you delete a vertex, anything connected to that vertex will also be deleted. And I'll press Ctrl Z, which is the undo command. It's one that's always worth remembering, because if you accidentally do something you don't want to, it's very easy to Ctrl Z and undo. And you can undo quite a few steps as a default in Blender, or you can set up how many undo steps that you want in the preferences, which is something for later on as you get more experienced. So we can delete vertices. The next one in the list was edges, so I'll just select one edge by selecting the two vertices. So you've got a selected vertex and the active vertex, and I'll delete those by again pressing X, and this time choosing edges, and it deletes the edge. It doesn't delete the selected vertices that are either side of that edge, just the edge, and because there's no edge between two faces, the faces are also removed. So whenever you delete an edge, you'll take away any faces that are surrounding it, and you'll also take away the vertices if there's no faces on those vertices. So again, Control Z, and the next one is delete faces. So select 4 vertices and press X and delete faces, and that just takes out the face. Even though you've had the 4 vertices selected and edges selected, it maintains the faces and edges around it, unless you select more than one face. So Control Z and just select the top faces. So we've got 4 faces selected, and if we go X delete faces, it takes out the 4 faces and any joining edges and vertices that are around those faces, so that all the edges and vertices were selected that went with the faces in the centre. And again, Control Z. While they're selected, there's the other option, and we'll go X delete only edges and faces. So that takes out all of the edges and the faces that were selected, but leaves the vertices, which means that on the non-selected faces that were surrounding the 4 selected faces, you still have the edges displayed, and all the vertices. You can see it better in that shade, that there's a centre orphaned vertex and there's some edges and vertices still connected to the cube. So you have to be careful with that, not to leave orphan vertices, which is quite easy to do. And the other option is X and only faces, which leaves all of the edges and vertices and takes out any selected faces. So it might be useful in some situations where you need the underlying structure to build something from that. But again, can leave you with undesired edges and orphan vertices sometimes as you're modelling. So just be careful of that when you're using those options. I'll Control Z again. The next option is the dissolve options. What this does, I've just selected the centre vertex of the top face of the cube, and we'll press X and this time dissolve vertices. And what it's done is deleted the vertex, so any edges that we use in that vertex to define the end of the edge have also been deleted, but it's rebuilt the face in the area where the deleted vertex and edges have gone from. So you've now got an end-gun on the top of the cube rather than a quad-based face. It's just rebuilt an end-gun into the place where the 4 faces were. Control Z that, and then we'll select an edge and go X dissolve edges, and it's taken the edge out and created a face where the previous 2 faces were. So you've now got an end-on face in the hole that was left by deleting the edge. So it keeps the mesh watertight by adding a new face to whatever's been dissolved, or whatever, whether it's edges or vertices that have been dissolved. Control Z that, and the last option is dissolve faces. I'm going to have to use more than one face because you can't dissolve just a single face because it's already a single face that it would rebuild in its place. So I'll select 2 faces and X dissolve faces, and it will take out any of the internal geometry within selected faces. So we took out one edge, exactly the same as dissolving an edge. If I go back and select 4 faces, by selecting the surrounding vertices, and dissolve that, dissolve faces, it takes out the internal geometry of all of it, so you get one large dissolved area, as if you dissolve just the face. So that's dissolve faces. Control Z back to the option. There's another option I'll mention. There's a few in there, but they get, as you get more advanced, and we'll go into edge select and select an edge loop. So we've got an edge loop running around the cube, and by pressing Alt, I'll just go back on that, Control Z to deselect it. If you press the Alt key while you're selecting an edge, Blender will try and find the loop of edges that follow that one edge. So back in Vertex Select, you've got a loop of edges now selected, and you can press X, delete edge loop using the last selection, and that takes that loop completely out and leaves you now with only 3 faces around the sides, 3 edge loops around the sides, but 4 over the top. So they're the basic delete options. I say there's 1 or 2 more, and we'll look at those as we're modelling and find a need to use them. The next option for creating new vertices, edges or faces is to extrude them from the existing primitive or model that you're working on. To do this, in the tool panel we have a series of tools, and you select Extrude Region. If you hold your left mouse button down while it's over the Extrude tool, it gives you different options for Extrude, which we'll quickly go through. But first of all, if you select an edge, if you select a vertex and extrude, well, just use the Extrude Region. The shortcut for Extrude is just E, which becomes very quick for Extrude Region. It gives you 2 options, and one is to drag out the widget, which drags the vertex out from a new vertex out from the selected vertex and creates an edge behind it. And the yellow widget will drag the vertex out along the vertex normal. And you can see the vertex normals in the overlay panel under the normals, and if you click on that you'll see that each vertex has a little pointer, and it's only on one side of the face or the model that you're working on, which indicates that it's on the outside face, which you need to keep consistent to have correct shading. So the vertex normals on the corners and the edges are at different angles because they have to take account that the vertex has faces going in different angles around the corners. So you'd be aware of that if you're dragging out a vertex that isn't on a flat face. I'll just get rid of those vertex normals out of view, but it shows you which way they'll drag, and the widget points in the direction of the normal. The other option, and I'll just extrude that vertex again. So if we go grab the widget and drag it again, it drags it along the face of the normal, which is now not constrained to the face at the back. So the third option to extrude is, as a vertex, is to grab the outer ring, and this allows you to freely grab a new vertex. So you can build shapes with edges and vertices. You can fill those shapes then by selecting at least 3 vertices and adding a new face by using the shortcut key F, which gives you a new face which is separated from the cube because it's been extruded out from it. Very simple to build shapes this way, and you can also build quite accurate shapes. I'm going to delete those 3 vertices and go back to the basic mesh, because the next option I'll talk about is the extruding edges. And as with extruding a vertex, the edges have an edge normal that when you extrude, if you click and drag on the yellow widget, it drags a new face out from that edge. So it would cause you problems with shading if you were working in that way and having 3 faces coming out of one edge. But as you're building models, it's a very quick way of creating faces over surfaces and of different shapes. And as with the vertices, grabbing the outer ring brings out a new face that's free to move in any direction when you're dragging the face out, so as you can see. So again, I'll just delete those X vertices, so we're back to the original cube. and the last one is extruding a face. So we'll select one face, and as you extrude you can drag it out. You can drag it a set distance, so as you start to drag this you could type in number, I'll put 0.5 for half a metre, and that edge now is half a metre, 0.5 blender units, whichever you want to call it. And you can, in face select mode, very quickly select faces and drag them out to create all sorts of shapes, and very quickly build up what could be, if it was a round circle, what could be pipe work, what could be columns for a building. Very quick process. So that's creating new vertices, edges and faces using Extrude. And again, I'm going to go into side view, numpad 3 for side view, and select all of the vertices that we've extruded out. So we'll go Z to go into wireframe. I'll go into selection mode and just drag a box over those, and X to delete them. So we've now deleted what we've created, but we've also deleted the original face. If I go into Z and solid, you'll see the face has gone as well. So just reselect those and press F to add a new face, and that brings it back to a watertight cube. The next extrude option is Extrude Manifold, and this is a new one for 2.9. So we'll go on to that, and that gives you an option. I'll go back first of all to Extrude Region and just select a corner face on one of the corners. This could be on a corner or an edge. When you extrude, if you extrude back into the model, it leaves the existing edges, so you're creating, at this point, that vertex isn't attached to the top face, it's loose from it. So that if I Control Z from that, Blender was upgraded in the last revision to have Extrude Manifold. And now if you do the same operation with Extrude Manifold, it extrudes back into the model, but you've created new vertices that are connected to the surrounding face and removed the unwanted edges and vertices from the original corner of the cube. So that's quite a useful tool, especially for architectural modelling or anything where you're extruding back into a model. The next one is Extrude Along Normals, and I'm going to Control Z just to bring that face back out. And Extrude Along Normals, again, if you extrude region as you saw in the first one, and I'll just select the top face as well and do an extrude region, it drags out as an average of the two face normals, so you're no longer coming out square or perpendicular to each of the faces, you're coming out at an average of the angle between the two faces you've got selected. Control Z that, and Extrude Along Normals in that situation would grow the selection, and in the extrude region and shrink you've got some options, which is offset even, which would square that up. So again, very useful when you're trying to keep an equal thickness of extrude around an edge loop. Again, Control Z that, and Extrude Individual with that same selection would extrude each of the faces along the separate face normals. So again, on a complex mesh, this can give you some quite good effects. And finally, we've got Extrude to Cursor. Before I do that, I'm just going to Shift deselect two of the vertices, so we've just got one face at the moment. And then if we go to Extrude to Cursor, wherever the mouse cursor is on the screen, once you left click, you'll start to build a series very quickly, can add some quite good organic shapes. It will follow wherever the cursor goes, and that's quite a weird move because the cursor was almost behind where I first extruded. But very quickly build organic shapes just by moving the cursor and left clicking. So that really is the Extrude tools. The next tool in the list is Inset Faces, and this allows you to inset. It's easy to demonstrate, but just select a face and then move the widget in. It allows you to pull that face in and create a new face in the middle of it. And if I just Control Z out of that and just change the shape of the selection, if we go into face select mode, and have a face, if you use it on these faces, you can bring in an equal length border, and in the tool again you've got some options: offset even or offset relative, which gives you different thicknesses. As you change these, it'll take some experimenting to find out which gives you the best results for what you want. But normally the offset even gives you the squarer corners and most parallel edges. But you can simply create new shapes on the top face. If you combine that with Extrude region, you've now on the top of the cube got a completely different shape to what was on the original faces, just by insetting selected faces of the cube. So Control Z out of that. The next tool in the list is Bevel, which gives you bevel corners. Just to demonstrate this, I'm going to extrude up some of the top faces, just to give us different shapes to bevel. And from this now, if we go into edge select mode and then select just the vertical faces, what we've just extruded up, just the corner faces of that, what we've extruded. Click on Bevel and then drag the mouse slightly. You'll see it completely changes the shape, putting an extra face on the corners. In the Bevel panel, you have an option for the number of segments, so you can increase that to round the corners off. To give you the rounded corners around the top of the top face, it's changed the top geometry to accommodate the internal bevel. There's a number of options in there that I'm not going to go into all of the options. If you are interested in looking deeper at this, there's lots on the internet, on the Blender manual, and my book, the 2.8 modelling guide, gives a good reference section that goes into the different corner types for the bevels, and much more detail than I can cover in a quick tutorial like this. So Bevel gives you the rounded corners. You've got the option of upping the number of sections, segments within the bevel to make it a more rounded corner. And if you go back into select, I'm just going to select a few vertices on the edges of this and put up quite a large bevel. So you've got 3 corners on there. Go to the bevel and then drag out, and again add some segments. It rounds off where your selection is and tries to close the bevel at the end of the last selected line. And the same if I go back into select and select around the outer edges of the top and bottom of the projection we brought out the top of the cube. Sometimes it's not easy to see the selection on the default colours, and it's always easy if you press Z for wireframe. You can see if you've got continuous edges, which on this we need to just select a few others. They haven't all selected all the way around because of the different intersections with different edges. So you have to make sure you've got continuous edges if you're trying to get a bevel all the way around a surface. And I'll go back into solid mode. This one's easy to see once it's selected. And again, we can bevel, or we can just use the command B, control B, sorry, for bevel, and drag out to increase the size of the bevel. And that gives you quite a nice feature. If you tab into object mode, you can see you're starting to get some much more organic edges and shapes to the model. And if we change the shading into smooth shading, wherever the bevel is, it carries a nice smoother shading over. You need to change the vertex normals to auto smooth, face normals to auto smooth to give that. But the bevel gives you a nice rounded corner. The next tool in the toolbar list is the loop cut tool. So you just activate the loop cut tool, and you'll see as you get close to the mouse, Blender's looking to find where it can add new loops, cut through loops of faces. So when you get over the face that you want to cut the loop on, or the edge you want to cut a loop perpendicular through, just left mouse button click and a new edge is created. If you want to move that edge, left click and hold, and then you can drag that edge anywhere between the confining vertices on the edge that you're cutting. So it gives you an option to put edges in different positions. Very useful for adding geometry that's following existing edge geometry, but where you just want a little bit more detail. So that's the loop cut. I'm just going to undo those loops we just created and zoom in a little bit and change to the other option in loop cut, which is offset edge loop cut. And what this one does is, if you select or alt select a loop of vertices, it allows you to click over that edge, click over that edge, and it will drag out a loop either side of the selected edge. So you always get an even amount of, or an even face size either side of that loop, rather than working one loop above, one loop below individually, and not necessarily getting them in even places if you want symmetry around that loop. And again, when modelling a model with symmetry, when you finish symmetry, you might find you need to add further loops in, and it's very useful for that. The next tool in the list is the knife tool. I'm just going to go into top view numpad 7 for this one. And the knife gives you an option. You left click to activate it, and then when you go over an edge or a vertex, it will snap to the edge and show you where the knife will cut through that edge. You have the option of pressing Control on the keyboard to snap to the centre line of an edge, and then you can just freely put vertices cutting through faces and edges at will. And once you've finished, press enter. That cuts a new line of vertices into the face, so those faces are now split. If you go into face select mode and select it, you'll see they're now split, cut in half by the knife. The other option you have, because that's just cut the top face, if you scroll round to the underside, you'll see that's still the same. So if you go back to the top face, numpad 7, the other option you've got with the knife, and again, activate the knife tool, click, it gives you at the very bottom of the screen, it will give you a list of different commands you can use with it. So we've had the snap to the center line, which is the control command. One of the other commands you can use is Z, which allows you to cut all the way through the mesh. So if you activate it and you come down to the bottom here, you will see Z cut through is now on. If you press Z again, it turns it off. And you can also constrain the cut to set angles or straight along axes. So if you constrain it with the shortcut C, you'll see it's 45 degrees or 90 degrees to the view. So it will always give you a straight line or a 45 degree angle from wherever the start point is on that. Turn constrain off. But if we just repeat a similar cut to above, press Control, and on there, and then enter. If we scroll down now, you'll see the cut through has put that knife cut all the way through the sides and through the underside as well. So the knife is very good at creating new geometry that's on existing faces where you want to maybe cut holes through the face, put new vertices in where holes are required. And you've got the constrain the knife, you've also got the cut through option with the knife. The next tool is the Bisect tool that allows you to cut through the mesh that you're creating using a plane defined by the Bisect widget. With this you need all of the vertices selected, and it gives you an option to drag from your view a line through through the model. If you look, then you'll see that line is made up of a plane, and that plane can be changed in its angle and position by changing the rotation of the widget, and that allows you then to cut through the model. I'm just going to tab out and tab back in just to get rid of the widget, and you can see it's cut an edge loop all the way around the model that was defined by the widgets plane. A little awkward to use at the moment. It's one I need to practice a bit more. The next tool in the toolbox is the Polybuild, probably a little bit advanced for a new user, but a very quick overview. The intention of the Polybuild is to retopologize, which is add a low poly mesh manually over a high poly mesh. So if you've got a sculpted character that you've created with maybe 1 million vertices, you can very quickly build a low poly mesh over the surface using Polybuild. But that gets quite advanced, and it's one for a series of tutorials all on its own on character building. But just as a very quick demonstration, I'll delete the cube, just tab into edit mode and delete the cube, and add Shift A to add a mesh plane. Go into top view, number 7, zoom out a little bit and tab back into edit mode. So if we now activate the Polybuild, you'll see a blue line is added on the edge nearest to wherever the mouse is. If you follow around there, you've got a blue edge. This allows you to just click and drag wherever the blue edge is to start building polygons. And if you press Control, it allows you to drag out either a triangle or to build out from a corner. A very quick way of building organic meshes. And what have you from just a base mesh. But the intention of this is really to wrap this low poly mesh onto the surface of a high poly mesh, so you can create characters that will display well in things like computer games or animations, where Blender would have to work really hard to move and animate a sculpted mesh with tens of thousands or even millions of vertices. So it's just a very quick way of allowing you to create a fairly organic mesh and to tweak the mesh you're working on to add various shapes. Still working on a flat plane or on the view plane as you're working around, which is where the retopology comes in, so it can snap back onto the surface of a high poly mesh. A little bit advanced at this stage for a new user, but that's a quick overview. You can just drag out the lines very organically, and it's a very quick way to build a polygon surface. The next tool in the tool panel is the spin tool, another extremely useful tool, and one that a lot of CAD packages will call the lathe tool, because it's used to create profiles of round cylinders, shafts, columns, and other objects like that. I've removed the mesh that we created with the polybuild and just added a plane back in, and from that plane, to demonstrate the spin tool, I'm going to just select all, deselect one vertex, and then delete the other three vertices. So X for delete vertices. So we've got an orphan vertex. I'll move that, we're in top view, so I'll move it on the y-axis 1 meter to bring it back in line with the origin and the 3D cursor. So we grab the vertex on the y-axis, pressing Y for the y-axis, and 1, and enter. So the vertex is now in line with the 3D cursor and the origin of the plane, and I'll move it 0.5 meter. So grab X 0.5, which brings it a little bit closer. If we go into front view now, and numpad 1 is front view, we can extrude that vertex, extrude Z, and I'll go up at 0.5, enter, and then extrude X minus 0.5, extrude Z 0.5, extrude X 0.5, extrude Z 0.5, and then extrude X minus 0.5, extrude Z 0.5, extrude X 1, and that puts it back on. So we've now got an arbitrary shape, and the bottom vertex, just to close the cylinder, I'll extrude X 0.5, so it sits back on the centre. The things you spin don't have to sit on the 3D cursor or origin. So we've now got a profile of something we can spin. So select all and activate the spin tool. It brings up a widget that is a circular widget, and it's currently acting to spin on the Z axis. So I'll just click on that, and it straight away spins the profile we've made into a 3D object. The spin tool options are quite complex. It's got auto merge, so the first and last vertices will be added together. It's currently made up of 12 steps. You can increase this to make a smoother circle. So 32 would divide by 8, which gives a good number to use when you're creating any round objects. That's the basics of it really, but you've got options to change the spin from spinning just on the vertical. We've set our profile out for the Z vertical axis rather, but you can change it and do it on a Y axis, which will look really weird when you do this. Just by changing the ratio from which axis has the spin on it, so it's now spun it around the y-axis. We could change that to use duplies and take the number right down to 12 again. And if you look then on number 3 for the y, number 1, it's spun that profile 12 times around, reduced that down so it separates them out at the end. And it's, rather than using and creating faces, it's individually spun it 9 times in this case around the centre axis. But really that profile was designed for the z-axis, so that's where it should be, 0. And you do that by altering the axis indicator or the axis ratios that you use in the centre box, and take off duplies and take that back up to a much higher number. 32 to give you the profile that you want. Again, the spin dupli, if I just go into numpad 1 for the front view, select all and delete what we've just spun, vertices, and add a mesh, because we're already in edit mode for a mesh. It only gives you mesh options, and add a UV sphere. I'll just scale that down to a smaller size, grab it on the x-axis 1.5 and go back into top view. We can now spin that sphere as a dupli object, so that it's now individual objects that's been spun around that centre point, rather than trying to draw faces between each one. And again, just tab into object mode, you can see it's very quick to spin things either as a duplicate of what you were spinning, or as an extrude of what you were spinning, like the lathe tool. The next tool is the smooth tool, and this is the first of the tools that don't add vertices, they just modify the position of vertices that we're working with. First thing I'll do is just tab back into object mode and delete the circles, the spheres that we use the spin tool to circle around the cursor, and I'll add, so Shift A to add, and a mesh, and the mesh I'll put a cube back in, tab into the cube, go into select, and then right click and subdivide, and again do 3 subdivisions just to give us a slightly more detailed cube with more vertices. So if we now click on the smooth tool, it gives us a widget. I've got all the vertices selected and there's sharp corners on the cube, and if we just drag the widget, it tries to round off the corners. If you keep going, it'll go past, and because the top 4 faces and the side 4 faces are on a flat plane, it doesn't try to smooth them, they're already flat as they can be. So it gives you an option to try and pull in the shape of something that's got a little bit jaggedy and irregular. And if I do that again, now it's already smooth part way, it'll now start to try and smooth the top faces, and you're almost pulling it into a sphere. So it gives you an option to relax and make things a little bit more smoother. I'm just going to undo those steps with Control Z, because we've got the next tool under smooth, which is randomize, and this can be a little bit vicious the way it moves. So you only need to move the widget slightly and it will just throw the vertices in and out in all sorts of random directions to form a random shape. If you're making rocky terrain and things like that, it's a very quick way to make rough surfaces, especially when they're in a distance and you're not looking for too much specific detail. If we just go back to the smooth tool, we can, with a little bit of work, try to relax back towards the square and even take it back towards a sphere by carefully unrandomizing the vertices. Doesn't quite take it back as smooth as you would from a square, but it's done a pretty good job. So that's the smooth and the randomize options. Next in the tool panel is edge slide, and this allows you to drag an edge loop. So if I just Shift Alt select the single edge loop, the edge slide allows you to drag it up or down along the edges that are perpendicular to the loop of edges we're moving. Very, very useful for fine positioning. And again, Alt left mouse button, select a different edge loop, and it gives you that option of positioning edges along, keeping them so they move along the position of the edges that were perpendicular to them. And the other option in that one is vertex slide. So again, if we select a single vertex, we can now slide it either up and down the edges around it or across, but it won't move randomly into the centre of a face. It's always constrained to where the original edges were, where it moves. So it moves along the position of the original edges. Very good for final positioning when you're doing organic modelling. The next tool we've got is Shrink Fatten, and I'll just go into select mode and face select for this, and circle select the top faces, and then circle select two sides. Circle select is the shortcut C. So we've got the random shape that we've created from the cube, and what Shrink Fatten does is similar to Extrude along normals, but it doesn't leave the existing edge loops around the edge of what's selected. So if I click on this and drag the widget, we'll see it grows relative to the existing faces, right? So the outer faces are growing with the faces that were fattening out from the original mesh. And the other option in that one is push pull, and what this does is effectively is similar to Extrude. So you're just combining all of the face normals into one trajectory. So you're either growing or shrinking along the average of the face normals, as we spoke about in the Extrude. So that's push pull and Shrink Fatten tools, what they can do. And it's picking where to use them when you're building your mesh and your models. The next tool in the toolbox is the Shear tool. Before I demonstrate this, I'm just going to clear the mess we made with the Shrink Fatten Push Pull tool. So tab into Object Mode, press X for delete, and delete the distorted cube that we created, and then Shift A to add a mesh, and we'll add a mesh cube again. And then tab back into edit mode and just go to vertex select, so we've got a better view of the vertex edges and faces, and then right click and choose Subdivide from the pop-up menu and change the number of segments or number of cuts to 3. So we're back with the cube that we've been using through the demonstration. we can now activate the shear tool, and it brings up some different options, and you'll see the widgets that are within the shear tool are coloured the same as the axis indicator. So if you want to shear across the x-axis, you use the red one, so you're basically shearing around the x-axis. If you want to in the y-axis, you use the green one, and the z-axis the blue one, and that spins it around each of those axes and shears and changes its shape according to how much you move those indicators. Along with the shear, when we'll test out how good this is the to sphere tool, and with this one just click and drag out, and it will try and move the vertices that are there to the best sphere possible. You can overdo it to a degree, but it does quite a good job of creating a sphere from a quite angular surface, and pulls it back in. So they're not evenly spaced as they would be with a cube or nothing like a UV sphere, but you do get a reasonable sphere out of what was a mess of vertices. The final tools in the toolbox are the rip tools, the rip region and rip edge. I'm just going to select one vertex and click on rip region. What this does, at the moment the mesh is completely watertight with every vertex being connected by edges and faces. If you rip a vertex, if you select a vertex and rip it, it breaks open the mesh and creates another vertex. So it's ripped what was 4 edges and 1 vertex down to 2 vertices and 1 edge. And if you then rip again, you can open that up. So you've effectively peeled open at that 1 vertex. You can select the other vertex from the top edge, and you can't rip a single vertex, so the rip failed there, but you can grab it and move it. So that's how you rip a region. So you're bursting open what was a solid mesh. And the other rip option is rip an edge. And what this does, it doesn't break the mesh open, but if you select a vertex and then click and drag it, it creates a new vertex on one of the edges that you selected. So again, you can, very similar to subdividing, you're bringing new vertices and turning what was a quad into a n-gon. So that's rip edges rather than ripping the complete mesh open. If you want to heal those back together, a tool that's not in the toolbox is the merge tool, and where we've cut these apart, if I go into select, so we don't have the rip tool active, we can select the 4 vertices that were created from 1 and press M for merge, which is the shortcut, and merge at centre, and it will bring them back to being a single vertex. It may not be in exactly the same position as before, and you may need to use techniques to reposition it back where you wanted it if you'd ripped it accidentally. But those are the basic tools that you'll be using to create all sorts of models that you wish to create as you learn more and more about Blender. Hopefully that's been an informative overview of Blender's interface, object mode, and the very basics of edit mode. As we move on in this series, we'll move away from the getting started section and on to the first practical projects. The first of these is going to be a plasma cutting table, initially a manual one, but maybe later converted to an XY CNC table. Look out for the next videos, as they will be a change of style where you will be working alongside the videos to build models using design concepts that we talk through as we construct my version of the model. It doesn't stop you doing something else to produce accurate models that you can build in your own home workshops. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and hopefully we'll see you for the next series of practical projects.